How did I get into oyster farming? Well, the year was 2015 or 16, and I was working at a restaurant on the waterfront. I was actually just there to be building a dock. And every day, I'd go in, start working on the dock, and just basically general construction. Well, one day, I showed up to work. Check this out. Got this from Landlocked, Oyster South, and you know what's cool? These are essentially all sales in here, and we owe a large part of them to the very awesome people that adorn this bucket. Oyster South, my goodness. One of the key reasons we are who we are, but that's later in the story. So I love construction, I love building. I really was just looking for something, a job that would keep me outside and keep me active. And I've just always liked building things. Day after day, one day I came in and there was 1,000,000 6mm oysters sitting on that dock. I had no idea how long they had been out there. Now that I think about it, it's amazing that they didn't just die. So I guess they were sitting on the dock overnight. I walk in, they are ready to be deployed, and instead of going and lifting up a hammer, my boss said, "Hey, can you try and make me some oyster cages?" Now, I had never seen an oyster cage. I actually had never really eaten oysters. Funny enough, I didn't really eat oysters until about a year into growing oysters. Let them grow too big. And that was the first day. So I looked up online. I didn't see any information on oyster farming at all. The first cages that we made were made out of tomato cages. I'm gonna look back at my photos and see if I can find any, but they look like little Sputniks from the space program, made out of razor wire, chicken wire. They were horrible. And I didn't know anything about densities, so I filled them up to the brim as seed. Next time we came out there, exploded. Now, I was a miserable oyster farmer. I was really bad at it at first, but when you start something, you're always gonna be bad at it. Being out on the water was enough of a pull for me to really get interested. When I think back about it, I can remember driving back from the first day of working on the farm, or at least prepping, and I was like, there's no way this is a real job. There's no way this is a real job. Nobody's gonna buy these for 35 cents. Because if they do, you sell 1,000,000, that's $350,000. There's no way this is a real job. Well, I kept thinking that for a few more months. Sat there, worked the oysters, just watched, enjoyed my life for the first time in a really long time. Well, I was still doing food running, construction, and like anything that the boss man needed me to do at the time. It's funny because I didn't even stay until those oysters were harvested. I did not finish the year with him. What happened was, on my birthday, I sat down next to him at the bar and I said, "Hey man, make me a server." I was just a bartender at the time in a construction and I was getting paid hourly, but I said, "Hey man, make me a server. These servers are making a killing." They were making $300 a night and I was getting tipped out 20. So on my birthday, I sat next to him at the bar and I said, "Hey man, I need to be a server." And he said, "I need you right where you're at, bud." So I quit. I decided at that point, then and there, I was gonna start farming oysters. I didn't even know, I hadn't really seen that this could be a viable business. Maybe if you owned a restaurant and could sell them. I said, but when you're making no money and all you gotta do is replace a $15 an hour income, you can do that pretty quickly by selling 30 oysters an hour. So that's what got me thinking. That was the original math equation that got me thinking that I could really just do this. Don't need to make a lot of money, just enough to support myself, spend the day on the river, and enjoy my days. After quitting working for him, I moved back in with my dad in Raleigh while actively trying to get my own lease in Carteret County. See, I didn't know if the oyster farming was going to work out right away, so I decided to go back to school, Wake Tech. I was going back to school, working at Lowe's Home Improvement, moving fridges, which was an awesome job, awesome company. And one day I get a call from the DMF, and a man was terminating his lease. They said, "If you can come down and sign the paperwork, the lease is yours." I'll never forget. I was at the gas station at a Sheetz, and we were getting our breakfast to do the fridge delivery that day. And I told my buddy I was working with, I said, "I got to go to Carteret County." He said, "Yes, you do." And I went back, and I drove to Carteret County that day, and I got the lease. That was a miracle. So after I got the lease, I kept working at Lowe's, and I slowly would just come down on the weekends. I literally did not have a boat. Me and my mom, or really whoever would come out with me, would take kayaks from a very nice lady named Nola, and she would let us walk through her property and walk out to the lease, and it was like a mud pit. And we'd go out there. Here we are at the oyster farm. You can't see it, but got my mom. All right, so after I got the lease, I was still working at Lowe's and I needed some money. So I called up my grandpa and gave him my business pitch. And the pitch was, I'm gonna buy 20 bottom cages, I'm gonna buy 100,000 6mm seed, and then the rest of the money is for ropes and clips and whatever else I need. He gave it to me, 4% interest loan, very good terms. I think it was 18 months. He was being super awesome. And that is where we got the first money to buy cages from. So I got my hands on 100,000 oysters from Ward Oyster Company. Thank you, Chris. You guys are awesome. And we tossed them out. I had never even really seen an oyster grow. I can remember throwing the oysters out one day and then feeling like it was Christmas for a week, waiting to go check on them. And it was about 5 or 6 days afterwards, I went out and checked on them because I didn't know whether they'd be alive or dead. And at that point, I was like, if these things are alive, my business is a success. And if they're all dead, then at that point, I didn't really feel like it felt like a real business because I'd never seen the oysters grow or anything. Well, it went out a week later and they had little fingernails growing on them. So that was one of the first times when I was like, wow, this business could really be something. I never planned this. If you had told me 10 years ago that this is what I would have been doing, I would have said, you're crazy. It is hard to find a good place to sit on an oyster farm. All right, so first year, didn't know where we were gonna sell the oysters, just getting help from my mom. Phil wasn't on the scene yet. I'd actually partnered with a guy who was gonna start a farm. He actually didn't wanna work at all, so he basically quit. It's a hard job, really hard job, and I probably owe that man a thank you. So thank you, Matt. Now, from there, we just worked. I had a kayak and I saw the oysters growing, so I just got really tied into whatever was going on in oyster farming. And I went to a meeting with the USDA at the Farm Service Agency, and they said, hey, if you're a small business and a farmer, we will loan you money. I was like, oh. So I went and met with a nice lady, and I got a loan for 200 cages, and that was a game changer. There was also another really cool piece of luck that happened to me when I started my farm. I actually started with a different name, and the name, I think, was just very good luck. I hope I didn't screw the guy over, but I bought a bunch of t-shirts, and I even had the trademark. And he reached out and he said, that's my trademark. Don't make this difficult for me and I'll give you a couple $1,000. So I gave it to him, and I hope we're still friends to this day. But that was some much needed capital that just fell out of the sky. And that was Christmas of 2019 when that happened. So couldn't have happened at a better time for us, right before COVID. Our farm was fairly new during COVID, so we didn't have anything to lose. We had really no need for any more sales. We were a small company. Phil had just come on at that point. So COVID rolls around and we meet Oyster South online. We saw this cool party landlocked, and it just looked like an awesome community that we really wanted to be a part of. They were awesome enough to invite us in with open arms. There was nothing online about oyster farming, how to do it, what it was, where to get anything, what kind of equipment to use, but Oyster South was really an area for us to get information, meet other farmers. And here's another interesting point to this story. So at Oyster South, I met the first person that was raised by an oyster farmer, because I was trying to legitimize this business in my head as I was investing more and more energy into it. And I had never met a family that was supported by an oyster farmer. So I met Caleb of Baywater Shellfish, and I said, oh my God, your dad was an oyster farmer? Were you able to go to the dentist? Did you live in a trailer? And he told me no. He said everything was good, and I will never forget that. that was like, wow, this can be a real job and a real career. Somebody else did it. And he's been doing it for 30 years. I've since met Caleb's dad, awesome guy, actually at the Billion Oyster Project this year. And Oyster South has just been such an amazing part of our journey. And it's something consistent every year. And we always leave those events and come back with more energy for farming oysters. Beautiful oyster, absolutely beautiful. Whoo, it's cold. So I essentially started oyster farming because I wanted to be outside. My God, these are some pretty oysters over here, but quickly turned into something else like that. Ooh, it's cold, but it's not so bad. So finding out about Oyster South, I learned how to grow something like this. To be honest, just the skill, learning low density and clean gear. They taught me that, and I mean now I've got just all beautiful oysters. So Oyster South. I didn't know much about oysters when I got started in oysters, and I just liked being outside. But the more I found out about them, the more I've started to fall in love with them. It's a really healthy protein. These ones are beautiful. I was looking for a spot to film this and I just tripped down a cage that was full of these. But, all right. So where we are, that's where we started. I started out in Moorhead working at a restaurant for a guy. He dropped the oysters on in front of me. I loved it. I realized it was a real job, started to invest more time into it through the help of Oyster South and so many nonprofits and really just the awesome oyster community. We were able to create a couple of good jobs and something fun. So where do I see this going? I can't just stay the same forever. So we're really looking for a couple things. Figure out how to grow a lot of oysters at a good price point. What we're doing on YouTube as well is just trying to get the word out about oysters, to let people know that there is the opportunity for oysters to be a protein that everybody can get. I didn't really come from any background in seafood. My dad's an engineer, my mom was a nurse. My mom moving to the coast is what got me close to the water. I just got really lucky. And that's why I'm putting this stuff on YouTube. So maybe I got lucky to tell you about it, because it's not on YouTube prior, but some of my favorite things to do are come out and just look at pretty oysters. This is almost like yin and yang, just beautiful. I can show you this cage that I stumbled across. That's just an absolute stunner. This is what keeps me oyster farming. This was like an accident. It wasn't, but it was. We don't do anything. It's all about density and cleanliness. But finding these beautiful oysters just keeps me coming out the next day, because I know the customers are gonna be super happy with these. I know they're gonna be healthy from eating our product. A lot of wins. But where do I see the future of Crystal Coast? I see it expanding and getting more people involved. I don't know if we'll be able to do it here, but just showing people what oyster farming is about. It's a really cool group of people. It's a really cool way to live, and it's a lot of fun. 1 minute elevator pitch as to why I think oysters is a protein of the future and why it has the potential to be cheaper than chicken. So the simple oyster. This is a triploid oyster. We spawn it in a laboratory, essentially. They spawn these oysters extremely quick. This protein does not take any fresh water. It doesn't take soil. It doesn't need a vet. We have different kind of scientists. It gets its energy from the largest energy source, which is the sun, coming through phytoplankton. This oyster is a net positive for the environment. Each oyster filters 50 gallons of water a day, creates habitat, creates coastal jobs, resilient jobs, also creates a fun job that you can really respect the work you're doing. That's why I believe it needs to be the future of the protein, and one day it'll be cheaper than chicken. 1 minute. So I got here with a lot of help from a lot of people, a lot of family, a lot of friends. This time of year is just beautiful. You can see, well, you can't see it very well, but you can see your feet. Yeah, so where do I see the future for us? I see it actually gonna be online. We're gonna try and spread the word, the good old oyster gospel, about how good it is for oysters to be consumed, and we're gonna try and be involved in, getting the oyster cheaper than chicken, and helping create a community that can create that possibility. It's going to take way more than one person and one company. It's going to take multiple companies, probably decades. But I'd bet on it.